links to the research papers. You can get this as a free email sent to your computer or to the computer of one of your friends. Now, the talk this evening, Why the Universe is the Way It is prompted by something that astronomers have noted for some time, that the universe is a riddle surrounded by an enigma, embedded in a paradox, wrapped inside a puzzle. Or to quote from Stephen Hawking in his book A Brief History of Time, we want to make sense of what we see around us and ask, what is the nature of the universe? What is our place in it? Where did it and we come from? And why is it the way it is? I mean, why is it so big? Why is it so old? Why is it so empty? These are the questions that have plagued humanity or fascinated humanity since they first began to look up at the stars. Consequently, why is the universe the way it is? It's also generated complaints. We have the best-selling atheist particle physicist, Victor Stenger, in his book, The God, the Failed Hypothesis. In that book, he states that if God created the universe for humanity, he wasted huge amounts of space, time, matter, and energy. In other words, his point is, God made the universe for us. Why wasn't he satisfied with just one star and one planet? Why did he make such an enormous, wasteful universe? And another complaint he made in that same book, does God really need so much pain and suffering to achieve his ends? He says this is a possible God, but a hideous one. So he looks at all the suffering we human beings have to go through and makes the charge, surely we can make a much better universe than one in which we seem to exist. And the past 3 years, we've seen a proliferation of what I would call books from aggressive atheists. For the last 100 years, atheist scientists have been content to take a defensive posture, basically saying to the community at large, it's okay to be an atheist, and don't persecute us for being an atheist. But now they're taking the offensive. And it first began with Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. In that book, he says, if you believe in God, you have a mental virus. If you believe in God, you're fundamentally evil, and we need to rid the earth of folks who believe in God or follow religion. Likewise, Stenger makes the comment that belief in God is fundamentally evil, and we need to deal with this. And we've seen, 3 New York Times best-selling books come out in the past 2 years promoting this idea that belief in God is fundamentally evil. Now, I thought to start off my talk tonight, you'd be curious, where does this aggressive atheism come from? It's a new phenomenon. The source of it, as far as I can tell, comes from Free Inquiry. Free Inquiry is the largest circulation atheist magazine in the world, with a circulation of about 150,000. And they've been the ones behind the publications of the new Humanist Manifestos. The first manifesto was 1933, but there's been Humanist Manifesto 2 and Humanist Manifesto 3, prompted by Free Inquiry and the Secular Humanist Organization. But a number of years ago, Free Inquiry decided to go one step beyond these Humanist Manifestos and publish what are called the Humanist Affirmations. And in their last magazine, they reprinted these affirmations. I have a copy with them up here. This was in the inside cover of an issue back in 2002, and they just, as I said, reprinted it in their last issue. And what I want to do for you is publish these statements from these humanist affirmations that are different from what's in the manifestos. A lot of what's in here simply repeats what's in Humanist Manifestos 1, 2, and 3. But I think the source of this aggressive atheism comes from the 4 new statements. So let me begin and show you statement number 1. And the statement number 1 is that we deplore efforts to explain the world in supernatural terms and to look outside of nature for salvation. In other words, if you're looking beyond nature, this is a deplorable situation. Number 2, we are citizens of the universe. And in an accompanying commentary, they made the point, we are only citizens of the universe. The universe is all there is. And we affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to theologies of despair. And here's where this concept of a fundamental evil about belief in God comes from. That if you believe in God, you're in a pathway of despair, and your mission is to promote despair. And in case you missed the point, the final new statement, they say as secular humanists, we believe in optimism rather than pessimism, hope rather than despair, learning in place of dogma, and truth instead of ignorance. In other words, if you're an atheist, then your mission is optimism, hope, learning, and truth. What could be better than that? But if you're a believer in God, then your mission is pessimism, despair, dogma, and ignorance, and this is the reason that we really need to rid the earth of you. Now what I want you to understand is take these four new statements, which is really the foundation for this aggressive atheism, and I want you to put it in the context of this research paper that got published in the Astrophysical Journal by Lawrence Krauss. Who's Lawrence Krauss? He's the chairman of the Astronomy and Physics Department at Case Western Reserve University, but he's much more famously known for leading the fight against creationism and intelligent design. So he travels around the country speaking against both intelligent design and creationism. But in this paper, he lays out what we have to look forward to in the future of the universe. The title of the paper, Life, the Universe, and Nothing. Life and Death in a Never-Expanding Universe. And he published this paper shortly after astronomers had proven beyond any shadow of doubt that dark energy is a dominant component of the universe. In fact, the WMAP now tells us it makes up 72.1% of all the stuff of the universe. And dark energy has been likened as an anti-gravity term, but it's better described as an anti-elastic band effect. It's the energy that's embedded in the surface of the universe. And the way it works is the opposite of an elastic band. The more you stretch it, the more energy it gains to accelerate the expansion of the universe. And it's such that we now recognize that every year that goes by, the universe expands more rapidly than it did the year before. And this is going to keep going on and on into the future. And so what Lawrence Krauss does in this paper is look at what the future holds in the context of an ever-expanding universe. And he basically lays out 6 coming catastrophes of this ever-accelerating expansion of the universe. The first catastrophe he speaks about is how our field of view will shrink. What he points out is that dark energy already is expanding the most distant parts of the universe just under the velocity of light. So we observe all the way back to the cosmic creation event, 13.73 billion years ago. We notice that objects back then are moving relative to us at barely under the velocity of light, which means in the future, as dark energy accelerates the space surface of the universe at greater velocities, those objects will be moving relative to us at greater than the velocity of light, and therefore will cease to be visible. And as the universe gets older and older, more and more of the universe will be accelerated past the velocity of light relative to us and will cease to be visible. In fact, if you wait long enough, our sun will be moving away from us at greater than the velocity of light, and we won't see the light of the sun anymore. But the main appeal that he makes in the paper is, today, astronomy has achieved the ultimate of seeing to the very theoretical limits of the universe back to the creation event itself. But from now on, we're condemned to see less and less in spite of any technological advances. And this is incredibly depressing for astronomers to think about, that we're going to be seeing less and less as the universe gets older and older. However, he moves on from there and says there are more dire things to anticipate as the universe continues to expand at more rapid rates. Number 2, star formation will come to an end. As the universe expands more rapidly, it's going to become progressively more challenging for gravity to collect gas and dust and condense that stuff to make new stars. Matter of fact, the universe today is already expanding so rapidly that star formation has shut down in 90% of the galaxies. Our Milky Way galaxy is one of the rare galaxies where star formation is still continuing. But even in our galaxy, star formation is considerably diminished from what it was in the past. And as we look forward into the future, dark energy will accelerate the universe at such a point that star formation everywhere will cease. Well, that poses a problem because stars are like candles. I mean, a candle's got a bunch of wax, and when it consumes all the wax, the candle goes out. Likewise with stars, they're burning hydrogen and fusing it into helium, but eventually the hydrogen runs out. And you can fuse helium to make heavier elements, but eventually that runs out. So, for example, with our star, the sun, 4.5 billion years into the future, it will run out of fuel and will snuff out. Now, if it's a small star, unlike our star, it can burn a little longer. But there comes a time when all the stars everywhere in the universe will burn out. And with no new stars forming, that means that all those stars you see in the cosmos will all twinkle out and things will become dark. So that's the future we have to look forward to. And with the burning out of all stars, there will be a very catastrophic drop in the flow of heat from hot bodies to cold bodies. The efficiency of heat flow will drop dramatically. Now, what's the problem with the flow of heat dropping? Well, the problem with the drop in the efficiency of heat flow is that is how we gain information, that is how we learn. And so something far more depressing for scientists to consider is that in the future, knowledge will decrease. I mean, that's been the pride of humanity, that the longer we're here on planet Earth, the more knowledge increases. And in my own discipline of astronomy, the knowledge base doubles about every 4 years. But because of this diminished heat flow, there will come a time when we'll no longer be able to store information, and we'll no longer be able to accumulate information. In fact, the information that we're storing will eventually disappear. It will go faster and faster away, and our capacity to learn new knowledge will disappear. And as Lawrence Krauss points out in this paper, we're going to become progressively more and more ignorant as the universe gets older and older and expands more rapidly. Or to put it in the vernacular, because of this dark energy, we're condemned to become stupid and stupider as the future goes by. And again, that's incredibly depressing for scientists to think about, that we're actually going to know less and less instead of more and more as time goes by. But Lawrence Krauss says there's even worse news. It takes efficient heat flow for metabolism to work and for proteins to fold. And there'll come a time when the universe is expanding so rapidly that it'll be impossible for proteins to fold or for metabolic reactions to run. And when that happens, life everywhere in the universe dies. And with the end of all life is the end of all consciousness. And with the end of all consciousness is the end of any possible hope, purpose, or destiny for humanity or any life form that could possibly exist within the universe. Now, I've been reading the Astrophysical Journal since I was 16 years of age, and this is the most depressing article I've ever seen published in a journal. In fact, I would guess that this is probably the most depressing paper that's been published in the scientific literature, period. But what I want you to notice is it's the exact opposite of what the Humanist Affirmations claim. Here we have an astrophysicist using the rigor of what we know about dark energy and the mathematics of the universe, rigorously proving that we have no hope, purpose, or destiny. It's all doom and gloom from the perspective of a future within this universe. Now, as depressing as this paper is, I noticed upon reading it that Lawrence Krauss missed even more depressing news. All he looked at was the future. He did not look at the past. If he had looked at the past, he would have found more depressing news than what you see in this paper. Namely, that if we go back into the past, we got a similar situation. We're not going to be able to see as much of the universe as we see today. And the problem is this: it takes light time to travel along the space surface from the cosmic creation event, for example, to reach our telescope. And if we were created earlier, not adequate time would have transpired. For example, if we were created about 1 billion years earlier in cosmic history, instead of 14 billion years after the cosmic creation event, we'd only be able to see about 93% of the history of the universe. And the earlier you're created, the less percentage of cosmic history you see. And so what that really tells us, maybe gives us a glimmer of optimism. It's pessimistic in the past, it's pessimistic in the future, it's ideal right now. This is the one time in cosmic history in which we can see 100% of cosmic history. To review, if we're created earlier, creation light lacks time to reach us, but if we're created later, dark energy expands the universe at greater than light's velocity. Now, is it simply a sheer coincidence that we human beings live at that one moment in cosmic history when we can observe 100% of the history of the universe? Or is there some ultimate purpose in humanity possessing the capacity to witness 100% of the history of the universe, and in particular, to be able to directly observe the cosmic creation event? Only at 13.73 billion years after the cosmic creation event can humans observe all of cosmic history and directly witness the creation event. That's one of the chapters in the book. Why is the universe so old? If God wanted a universe for humanity, why did he make it so incredibly old? Well, that's the age in which we get to see everything. It also turns out that's the only time in which intelligent life is even possible. If we were brought on the scene any earlier, we wouldn't have the resources that we would need to sustain advanced life. But I'd like to get into a little more about not only the timing of humanity, but its location. And one of the things that has intrigued me for a number of years, long before I wrote this book, is how come planet Earth resides in such a very dark place of the universe? Everywhere else, the night sky is brighter, but here it's really dark. Why so dark? And a question I address in the book is, why is so much of the universe dark stuff rather than light stuff? The dark stuff makes up 99.73% of all the content of the universe. So when you look up at the night sky and see those stars and galaxies, that's only 0.27%. The dark stuff makes up 99.73%. And that's actually critical. If the dark stuff quantity were changed by just 1 part in 10 to the 122, no life would be possible anywhere in the universe. So in that sense, thank God that the universe isn't brighter than it is. Only an incredibly dark universe will permit the existence of life. And you say, why? Darkness governs the rate at which the universe expands. And if you wind up with too much darkness or too little darkness, it will expand at the wrong rate. So for example, if you have too little darkness, then the universe will expand so slowly that gravity will collect all the gas and dust, and all you'll get in the universe are black holes and neutron stars. And in black holes and neutron stars, molecules are impossible, atoms are impossible, even protons and electrons are impossible, and clearly life is impossible. On the other hand, if the universe expands too rapidly, then all you get is gas throughout the entire history of the universe. The universe would be expanding so rapidly that gravity would never be able to collect that gas to make any stars or galaxies at all. And you literally have to fine-tune the quantity of darkness to 1 part in 10 to the 122 to have the universe expand at a rate that will allow stars like the sun to exist and planets like Earth to exist. Now, to try to drive home the point a little bit, I want to compare that level of fine-tuning with the best example of human engineering design. And as far as I can tell, that's the Gravity Wave Telescope that's now situated in Hanford, Washington, and in the state of Louisiana, a machine so well engineered that we can make measurements to 1 part in 10 to the 23, length measurements. But that ranks 10 to the 97 times inferior to the level of design we see in just one parameter of physics that makes possible life here in the universe. Which means that the one that designed the universe for the benefit of humanity, at a minimum, is 10 to the 97 times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the Caltech and MIT physicists that designed this instrument. And I did research with these guys. They are very bright people, but they're not as bright as the one that designed dark energy. Also, I want to look at the location. I mentioned earlier about Earth's dark location. When we look at the Earth, we see that it is far from the galactic bulge. Now, in the center of that slide there, you can see that very bright nucleus of the Milky Way galaxy. It's incredibly bright, and if it wasn't for the fact that we were located quite a distance out from the center, that light would prevent us from doing any astronomy. The night sky would be blindingly bright. The other thing we note is our solar system happens to be halfway in between two spiral arms. I mean, you've got the Perseus arm on the outer side and the Sagittarius arm on the inner side. We're halfway in between, and that enables us to do astronomy. Why? Because if you're anywhere near a spiral arm, the bright stars there and the gaseous nebula that exists there would literally illuminate the night sky so brightly you wouldn't be able to do astronomy. And as I mentioned, we're far from these bright gaseous nebulae. This is a slide of the brightest gaseous nebulae in our Milky Way galaxy. This is the Orion Nebula, that fortunately is so far away and so small that it doesn't impede our nighttime observations. But it's an exception. What's exceptional about our Milky Way galaxy, it's still forming stars, and that's critical for advanced light to be possible. However, the gaseous nebulae are, although they're numerous in number, they're all small and they're all distantly situated with respect to the solar system. This is highly atypical. Other galaxies that we observe where star formation is going on have many very bright gaseous nebulae. And here's an example. This is the Tarantula Nebula. Let me pull it up here for you. Here we go. This is the Tarantula Nebula in the closest galaxy to us where star formation is going on. And it's much brighter than our Orion Nebula. And what I want to show you in the next slide is a side-by-side view that shows you the Tarantula Nebula right next to the Orion Nebula. Now, the Orion Nebula is the biggest, brightest gaseous nebula in our Milky Way galaxy, contrasted with the Tarantula Nebula. Now, can you all see the Orion Nebula on the left? That's it, right there.
Wow.
Okay, this is all the scale. If we were to trade places with the Tarantula Nebula and the Orion Nebula, when you would go outside at the night sky, that Tarantula Nebula would cover 80 moon diameters across the sky. It would be so bright you could read a newspaper by it, and we'd have to shut down all our observatories. Astronomy would not be possible. Now, there's more to our darkness. One of the things we notice is that our solar system is exactly in the galactic plane. Now here you see this Milky Way galaxy here. That's the galaxy band right there. But you can see a dust lane here. Now, the dust lane in our Milky Way galaxy is incredibly thin. It's a very thin disk that runs through the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And what's extraordinary about our star, the sun, is that as it orbits around the center of our galaxy, it does not go up and down relative to the plane. All the other stars we see in our vicinity, they have considerable up and down motion relative to that very thin dust lane. But the extraordinary thing about our sun is that it orbits about the center of the galaxy, it stays right in that dusty lane. Now the benefit of that is, number one, it protects us from the deadly radiation coming out from the center of the galaxy and extragalactic sources, but it also protects us from being blinded by the bright light coming out of the center of the galaxy. Now, that little map I showed you earlier, the Milky Way galaxy, was a map where they took off all the globular clusters. There's 150 globular clusters that orbit about our Milky Way galaxy. And to give you a view of what I'm talking about, this is a typical galaxy. Most galaxies are like this, not spiral in structure, but globule, in the sense that you've got all these stars packed in. Now, as you look at this slide here, you're going to see several little spots of light here. There's about 600 of them here. Those are not stars. Those are globular clusters that are orbiting about this galaxy. And the next slide shows you a small globular cluster in our Milky Way galaxy. This one has only 150,000 stars in it. but fortunately, it's nowhere near our solar system. Even though there are 150 globular clusters in a Milky Way galaxy, none of them are close to our solar system. The closest one is 7,500 light years away, and it's one of these small ones. Now here's a larger globular cluster. This has 10 million stars in it, but fortunately, it's 16,000 light years away, so once again, its light does not impede our capacity for astronomy. Now, we're not just talking about our solar system being in the darkest spot of our Milky Way galaxy where life is possible. It's also true that our Milky Way galaxy is in the darkest spot of our universe where life might be possible. And the next slide shows you a typical small cluster of galaxies. And here we have a spiral galaxy and another spiral galaxy. Here's a small one. This is a really big one, much bigger than our Milky Way galaxy. But like almost all clusters of galaxies, they're dominated by several of these supergiant galaxies. And this slide really doesn't do it justice. The light of this supergiant galaxy actually extends from one end of the slide all the way to the other end of the slide. And it is such that if you're an observer in any one of those spiral galaxies, you could forget about doing any kind of astronomical research. But that's not a typical galaxy cluster. Here's a typical galaxy cluster with about 10,000 member galaxies in it, filled with supergiant galaxies, and notice how jammed tight the galaxies are. Now, what about our Milky Way galaxy? It exists in a small cluster that has 40 members. It has no supergiant galaxies. It has no giant galaxies. There are two medium-large galaxies, our Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy, and the rest are dwarf galaxies. And unlike these galaxy clusters I've been showing you, where the galaxies, if they were the size of my fists, are about that far apart, and our local group of galaxies, the average distance is like this, without any supergiants. And so when we look up at the night sky, nearby galaxies do not impede us from doing astronomical observations. Well, what I'm pointing out here is that this seems to contradict what Lawrence Krauss is saying in this paper, that we have no hope, no purpose, no destiny. Because what we're seeing here is something that indicates that there must be some purpose. There must be purpose because we human beings not only are at the best time, the only time, the unique time to see all of cosmic history, we're also at that unique location. You know, it's one thing for the atheist to say it's a sheer coincidence that we human beings are living at the only time when we can see everything, but it's not just that we live at the only time, we also live at the only location. And so it really stretches credulity to talk about a double coincidence where we live simultaneously at the unique time and also at the unique location. Much more rational to conclude that there really is some purpose in humanity being in a position, unique position and unique time in which we can see all of cosmic history. Is it the case that the Creator, for example, has a purpose in us being able to see all of creation history? Or as the Bible says, the heavens declare the glory of God, they declare the righteousness of God. What we're seeing here is we're at the one position and the one time where it's even possible to see that. Now what I want to do in the next few minutes is give you 4 independent scientific evidences. I'm not talking about the Bible, I'm just talking about scientific evidences that demonstrate that we human beings do indeed possess some ultimate hope, purpose, and destiny. And there are many more than 4, but I'm just going to review 3 more pieces of evidences for you. One is called the Anthropic Principle Inequality, which also explains why the universe must be so old to support us. And if you thought you're going to hear nothing but physics tonight, I'm actually going to give you a little bit of biology. The fact that we see something unusual about what drives different forms of life here on planet Earth, and I'm going to end up with the original contribution in this book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. The universe as the best possible physics for the conquest and the removal, permanent removal of evil and suffering. And so let me first talk about this anthropic principle in inequality. If you're not familiar with the term, the anthropic principle is the observation that the presence of humans places severe limits on the constants of physics and the structure and history of the universe, the galaxy, and the solar system. And I don't know of any astronomer today who does research in this discipline that fails to disagree with Paul Davies' assessment that when we observe the universe, we see overwhelming evidence for the design of the universe for the benefit of life and human beings in particular. But it was the British cosmologist Brandon Carter who back in 1983 first pointed out this Anthropic Principle inequality. And what he explained is you really can't bring human beings upon the cosmic scene in anything less than 14 billion years. However, when we look at the maximum longevity for the survival of human civilization, it must be less than 41,000 years. Hence the inequality. It takes billions of years to make us a home, minimum, but the maximum time in which we can live in a civilized state is only thousands of years. There's a difference of a factor of 1 million between the two. Now the book goes into a lot of reasons for that Anthropic Principle inequality. I'm just going to give you a couple of hints at what supports this inequality. The first is the abundance of uranium and thorium. And uranium and thorium are critical for advanced life because that's the heat source that drives plate tectonics and provides for a long-lasting, strong magnetic field. And unless planet Earth were super enriched with uranium and thorium, we wouldn't have continental land masses, we wouldn't have a mechanism to compensate for the increasing luminosity of the sun, and we wouldn't have the strong magnetic field to protect us from deadly radiation. And uranium and thorium come from supernova eruptions, giant stars that burn their fuel quickly, and then as they explode in their final phase of burning, they shower interstellar space with the ashes of heavy elements, elements basically heavier than iron, including uranium and thorium. The only source of uranium and thorium in the universe are supernovae. Now, these supernovae are quite aggressive in the early history of the universe. When star formation is taking place at an active rate, you get lots of supernovae. But today we're late enough in the history of the universe where star formation has subsided to such a degree that the production of new uranium and thorium sources is definitely way below what it was in the past. And the problem with uranium and thorium, they're radiometric. Uranium decays with a half-life of 4.5 billion years, thorium with a half-life of 14 billion years. Hence we see this rise to a peak abundance. On the left side, we have supernova producing more uranium and thorium than the decay of uranium and thorium. But on the right-hand side, star formation has subsided to a point where the decay is far greater than the production of new uranium and thorium. Now, what that means is the universe reaches a peak abundance of uranium and thorium when it's about 9.2 billion years old. Okay, keep that in mind, because what we're going to look at is we're going to take the current age of the universe and subtract 9.2 billion from it. When you do that, you get 4.57 billion years ago. So it's 4.57 billion years ago when the universe reached peak uranium-thorium abundance. What's the age of the Earth? The best measurement of the age of the Earth is 4.5662 billion years ago. Notice the two dates agree, which means Earth formed at that very moment when uranium and thorium reached a peak abundance. And you say, well, why didn't God create us human beings 4.57 billion years ago? Well, the sun forms at the same time as the Earth. And the thing about the sun is, it's quite unstable when it's young. And it's going to become quite unstable when it's old. Stars are like human beings. They're very unstable when they're young, and when they're old, they're maximally stable when they're middle-aged. And that's the case with the sun. It reaches maximum stability when it's 4.57 billion years old. Now, bacteria can handle quite a bit of flaring activity. We human beings can't. We're big, we've got lots of protein. We really don't want to be around when the sun is in this unstable phase. Now, when we look at the sun, what we note is that of all the stars that exist, it's stars that are exactly the mass of the sun that have optimal stability. So big stars are more unstable than the sun, and small stars are more unstable than the sun. That's why life is only possible, advanced life is only possible on a planet that orbits a star that's the identical mass of our star, the sun. And the flaring minimum occurs when the sun is 4.57 billion years old. But something that's been discovered through neutrino research is that the sun entered an extreme luminosity stability 50,000 years ago, and at most it's going to last for another 50,000 years. Now, what I was sharing this morning and yesterday is that DNA evidence now puts the date for the origin of humanity, the first man and the first woman, at 50,000 years ago. That's the very time when the sun entered this maximum luminosity stability phase, and it can only last another 50,000 years at most. Now, there's actually other evidences that tell us that the window of time for human civilization is much narrower than that 100,000 years. But I think I've given you at least a hint here as to what undergirds this Anthropic Principle inequality. But what's most interesting is how Brandon Carter analyzed this. He says this inequality tells us that the human species must have a very high value and a high purpose. And he developed an analogy, but my wife thinks she's got a better analogy, so I'm going to use her analogy. And that's the wedding ceremony. Now, I'm not just an astrophysicist, I'm also a pastor in a church, and I've done quite a few weddings over the year, and I've actually timed those wedding ceremonies. They average out to be about 22 minutes per ceremony. And I went on the web a few weeks back and discovered the average American family spends $20,000 on the wedding. Now that works out to almost $1,000 a minute. Okay, and then the average bride spends an average of 1 year preparing for that 22-minute ceremony. And so, using the analogy of Brandon Carter, what is it that makes a rational bride and a rational father of the bride spend so much time and money on something that lasts only 22 minutes? It's because that 22 minutes has a very high value and a very high purpose. Therefore, the father does not consider it a waste of money, and the bride does not consider it a waste of time. Although in my case, I didn't get married till I was 32, and my wife was almost 30, and her father came to her and said, well, your mother and I have decided that we want to help pay for the wedding. We're going to give you $500, and anything that's left over you can keep. So, and of course it costs quite a bit more than that, but I think you get the point. And Brandon Carter's point is the only rational explanation for this enormous inequality, a factor of 1 million, is that there must be someone out there that places a very high value and a very high purpose on the human species. Now, I did say I was going to give you some biology. One of the mysteries of life is that we observe that all life strives for self-preservation. You know, every animal life form we see out there has this powerful drive within to seek to preserve its life or the life of its offspring, or both, or to maximize the quality of life. And we human beings have that same drive. And you know, I'm old enough to remember the theater release of that movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Probably several of you have seen it on television. And the kind of the plot of that movie is you've got this rogue computer, HAL, that has a self-preservation subroutine built into it. And because of that self-preservation subroutine, the computer rebels against the astronauts. While we walked out of the theater, I saw the movie with 4 other graduate students in the physics and astronomy department. And as we walked out of the theater, we were speculating, I wonder how long it will be before someone writes a subroutine, a self-preservation subroutine for a computer. And we all rather naively said, well, certainly by 2001 it'll be a done deal. Well, here it is 2008, and I don't know of a single programmer who even knows how to outline the subroutine, let alone write the subroutine, yet it exists in every life form. And here we have naturalists trying to explain the origin of life, but that's chemistry and physics. Where did this self-preservation subroutine come from? But if you look at higher life forms, we see other pieces of software embedded within their being. Birds and mammals have this drive within them to nurture and serve and please members of their own species, but what's incredible is they also are programmed to do the same thing with us human beings. And all this programming took place before we human beings even existed. They were programmed in advance to serve us and to please us. And if we look at us human beings, we have this drive to serve and please God, and we have this drive to seek after purpose and destiny. It was Saturday before last, I was doing a debate at Caltech in front of 700 atheists. And what I noticed is those atheists there manifest the drive to seek after ultimate hope, purpose, and destiny just as strongly as we Christians do. I don't see any difference. And yet if there is no God, why should we have any hope, purpose, and destiny? And why would we human beings have this drive if there is no reality to purpose and destiny? Evolution should have weeded it out a long time ago, and yet we all possess this drive. Now, what I present here is somewhat idealized. Now, I'm making the claim that birds and mammals are programmed to serve us and please us. We don't always see that. Likewise, I'm making the claim that we humans are programmed to serve and please God. How do you explain all the atheists that are rejecting the idea of the existence of God? Well, I think something gets in the way. You can call it sin, you can call it evil, and with respect to the birds and the mammals, it's our abuse, humanity's abuse of birds and mammals, that impairs their capacity to serve and please us, which is why they tend to run away from us and fear us, because they think we're going to do damage to them. But I've been taking vacations here in British Columbia where I purposely go to places where human beings haven't been for at least 50 years. And what I noticed there is that when you're dealing with these creatures, these birds and mammals that have not had contact with human beings, you can see their strong desire to serve and to please us human beings. If they've not been abused, if they've not been exposed to the evil, you see quite the opposite result. And likewise, it's evil that causes humans to turn away from God and hampers their capacity to serve and please Him. In fact, what I noticed at this atheist conference is that they were very passionate about the non-existence of God, extremely passionate and insistent about the non-existence of God. And I was commenting to several of them afterwards that I thought that provided us with the strongest evidence that day for the existence of God. And they were kind of puzzled, and I said, well, if God really didn't exist, you should be treating the idea of God the same way you do the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and Santa Claus. But I don't see you getting emotionally upset about the Easter Bunny. You only get upset about this idea of God. My belief is that you don't deny the existence of God, you just don't like Him. Or you don't like the people that follow God. And they said, well, we agree with you there. We don't like the people that follow God. But the whole point is there's a reaction that's going on that impairs our capacity to really fulfill the drives that are within. And last of all, we can notice that these laws of physics are optimally designed not only to provide us with a place to live, and simultaneously optimally designed to allow us to observe all of cosmic history. They're also optimally designed to efficiently deal with the problem of evil. This is something we've been working on of reasons to believe for several years. But if you look at each of the laws of physics, you can see they've been optimized to motivate us human beings to avoid evil and to pursue virtue. And in this sense, that the laws of physics are structured that the more evil you commit, the more pain you're going to experience. And the more evil you commit, the more work you're going to have to do to undo the damage, and the more time you're going to waste. Well, I think you can see the motivation here. How many of you out there in the audience like extra work, extra pain, and wasted time? Nobody likes that. And so that is a motivation that the laws of physics give us to avoid evil and to pursue a path of virtue. Now, there's some complications. What the physics does is guarantee that in proportion to the evil, there will be more pain, more work, and more wasted time. But it doesn't really designate who gets to experience the extra pain, the work, and the wasted time. And there's a lot of people out there who are very clever in their performance of evil, of transferring the consequences to other people. And this is why the laws of physics are also optimally designed to encourage the rest of us to restrain the expression of evil. If people in authority, like the police and the government and the army, doesn't do their work to restrain evil, guess who suffers more pain, more work, and more wasted time? So, for example, every mother and father is highly motivated to discipline their children, because if they don't discipline their children, they get stuck with the extra work and the extra pain and the wasted time. And so those of us who are parents are highly motivated to make sure that when our children fall into evil pathways, that they're the ones who suffer the consequences and not us. But having been a father, I recognize that my sons are very clever at trying to transfer the consequences to me rather than to them. But likewise, that's what motivates the police force to do their job, the courts, the government, the army, etc., to bring about this restraint. And basically, these are consequences to reverse the chaos that comes about as a result of our evil. This also applies, I'm arguing, not just to thermodynamics and electromagnetism and gravity, but also to time and space. And one of the things we notice about the space-time dimensions of the universe, time, for example, is only one dimension. Time cannot be reversed, and time cannot be stopped. No one can stop the passage of time, and we can't even slow it down that much. You can't reverse it, and it's one dimension only. Now, this has a powerful role in limiting the amount of damage that evil can do. It limits how many people we can harm and the degree to which we can harm them. Because of our limitations in time, there's only a limited number of human contacts we have. I mean, if we survey the audience here, I would guess that very few of us have more than 10 intimate friends. We simply don't have the time to develop more than 10 close friendship relationships. And we may have lots of associates. I travel around the world. I have thousands of friends, but I spend very little time with any of those thousands of friends because of simply the limitations of time, and for that matter, space. I got to get on an airplane to visit most of the people I know, and that's not an easy thing to do. We live in a universe with 3 large, rapidly spanning dimensions of space, so it really limits how many we can get to. Then we have our short lifespans. They also limit how much evil we can perpetrate. Now, a good example of this would be Adolf Hitler. Come 1944, Adolf Hitler became aware he was going to lose the Second World War. And who did he blame? Not himself, he blamed the German people. And so he concocted a plan that in his defeat would come the demise, the extinction of the entire German population. So we all know his notoriety for bringing about the death of 6 million Jews. But he also intended to bring about the death of 85 million Germans. But time got in the way, and space got in the way. In fact, in the last few months of his life, he was frustrated that he couldn't travel enough over Germany to bring about all the death sentences he wanted to carry out against people he was blaming for his defeat. And the other thing is, as doctors told him, he was dying of Parkinson's disease. And back then he didn't have the therapies we have today. He was told at most he had 2 years to live, which really explains all the bad decisions Adolf Hitler made in the last year of the war. He was pressured by a short lifespan. But the end result of it is all of that limited the damage that Adolf Hitler could perpetrate upon the human species. Well, I hope I've given you enough data here. There's more in the book, but enough data tonight to recognize that here we have 4 independent pieces of evidence that point to the purpose and the value of humanity and its destiny. And yet we have Lawrence Krauss here saying we have no hope, purpose, or destiny. What's the resolution? Well, I'd like to suggest that we have plenty of scientific evidence that there really is hope, purpose, and destiny for the human species, and that the mistake that Lawrence Strauss made is presuming that any hope, purpose, or destiny we would have to lie within this universe. And in fact, what we see in the Bible is a two-creation model. Now, I didn't even think about the existence of God or the different religions of the world until I was 17 years of age. But as I began to compare the holy books of the religions of the world, I noticed that outside of the Bible, they all present a one creation theology. What's fascinating is they all talk about humanity starting off in paradise, and how humanity loses paradise, but how God or gods or cosmic forces are on a mission to restore humanity to paradise. So when I picked up the Bible, I found something very different. That God is not going to restore us to paradise, He's going to deliver us from paradise. That paradise is actually described in the Bible as a place where humanity was shackled by the restraints of the physics and the space-time dimensions. And we have described instead as a two-creation model, where the first creation is that universe in which God brings about the end of evil and suffering to prepare the way for a new creation where the physics and the dimensions are radically different. A quick review of this two-creation model. It begins with God creating the universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And then God takes that universe and prepares it for human beings, but He also prepares it for the evil that will result. What does He first do? He puts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, paradise, where there is no evil, where the suffering is minimized. But one of the things we notice about the Garden of Eden is that God had the option of keeping Satan out of that garden for all of eternity. But God did not choose to do that. Instead, He opened the gate and invited Satan to come in. And so He allows Satan to come in, knowing full well what would happen. So we have human beings not only exposed to evil, but tested by evil and failing the test. But God had a master plan in effect to use that exposure to evil to bring about a much higher good. Namely, to bring about the end of all evil, but not just the end of all evil, the end of any possibility of evil ever occurring any time into the future for all of eternity. And then God prepares the new creation for redeemed human beings. And we have God permanently removing evil and placing redeemed humans in the new creation. And these redeemed humans rule with Christ over the angels and the new creation. Now, the heart of this two-creation model is God purposely exposing human beings to the most difficult challenge in the context of evil that's possible. It's no accident that Satan is the most powerful creature that God ever made. And so that means that we human beings today are being put under the greatest possible test. An analogy I use in the book that a few of you here in the audience might appreciate is the experience of getting a PhD. And a few of us here in the audience have this little piece of parchment. What that piece of parchment is unlike any other certificate that you get. That certificate guarantees that you'll never have to be tested again. And so that's the promise that the University of Toronto gave me, that I would never again be tested for my competency in astronomy. And it's based on the principle, I'm not saying it's true, but based on the principle that they subjected me to the most difficult test they could possibly concoct in the field of astronomy. And since I passed the most difficult test, there's really no need or point to test me again, so I get this guarantee. Well, in some respects, what we're going through now in this creation is similar. We're being subjected to the most difficult test. And as we pass that test, we get a guarantee as we enter the new creation. Never again will you succumb to evil, and never again will evil appear within the new creation, because the only people who go there are those that have passed the test. But there's another important component to the analogy. When I was at the University of Toronto, at least that time, back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, it was a very challenging program, such that in my class of 13 graduate students, I was the only one that got through the program without failing or spending time in a mental institution. We had the 16-story physics and astronomy building, and immediately next to it was a 12-story psychiatric hospital. And the joke was we needed to have a corridor between the two buildings. And it was amazing to me how often my professors were taking time in that institution. So, but the whole point is, there were many of my peers who wound up spending time in that mental institution or failing because they refused help from their professors. And our professors in the astronomy program told us, we don't care how bright you are, we don't care how hard you work, you're not going to make it unless you get our help. And I took that help from my professors, but a lot of my students wouldn't do that, and they didn't make it. Well, the same thing's true here. We have a creator that offers help to get through this most difficult test. And if we take his help, we will get through it. If we say we don't need you, you're not going to make it. So that kind of completes the two creation model. But what I do in the last chapter of the book is explain to you why it's really worth taking this life seriously. Because there's a great reward beyond. What is it that motivates a student to suffer for 4 years under the hands of his professors? I mean, it's not pleasant. But the reason why we students do it is we look forward to the 40-year career that lies beyond. And because of the promise of that 40-year career, we actually consider the suffering to be quite pleasant. Several of us actually enjoy the challenge of going through that suffering, but only because of what lies beyond. Well, the second creation, as described in the Bible, is worth every effort of the evil and suffering that we're being exposed to now. And keep in mind, it's short. It's only a few decades, and what lies beyond is all eternity. It begins right after the removal of evil. And so nobody goes to the new creation until evil has been permanently removed. It's a deliverance from paradise. It's not going to be the Garden of Eden. And the first creation is completely removed. As God spoke it into existence, he speaks it out of existence. And it's an enormous habitat. I mean, if you read Revelation, it talks about the geography of the new creation. How there's this apartment complex, the New Jerusalem, that sits on top of the new earth, and then there's the new heavens, and we've got access to the New Jerusalem, we've got access to the new earth, and access to the new heavens. Right now, we only have access to the surface of a small planet. And the living space of the New Jerusalem by itself, assuming the ceiling height is 2 miles, I like 2 miles because that gives you lots of mountain relief. There's a reason why I showed you those slides earlier. I really like mountains, and I think 2-mile-high ceilings would make for some rather pleasant scenery in my backyard. But even with ceiling heights that high, you've got more than 8 times the living space of the entire planet Earth. And hey, you've got access to the Earth as well. It's an enormous habitat, no longer limited, as Victor Stenger complains. And it's a place where there's no thermodynamics, no gravity, and no electromagnetism. As you read through the last 2 chapters of the Bible, you can see that these laws of physics are violated by what takes place within the new creation. And because of the lack of thermodynamics, there is no decay. It tells us there's no darkness. We know it's not electromagnetism because everything glows with light. There's no shadows, there's no darkness. When I see you in the new creation, you're going to glow like a light bulb, and so will I. Everything is emanating light. The dimensions are different. No longer will it be length, width, height, and time. We'll be delivered from the shackles of being confined to only one dimension at a time. It's a place where there's no grief, no remorse. There is no decay. There's no suffering. And it's a place where there's unimaginable splendor, joy, beauty, peace, and reward. Can you imagine a place where every time you do some work, that work never decays? You'll never have to repair anything. You know, my wife jokes I don't mind building things in the house, but I hate maintaining them. Well, in the new creation, no maintenance necessary. No house cleaning required. No dusting, no sweeping. And we have this unimaginable splendor, joy, replacing it. And we have this continual fellowship with God. And I think what's really going to be mind-blowing, our relationship limits will be lifted. You know, when I first signed my name in the back of the Gideon Bible, I thought about life in the new creation. And I said, it'd be really incredible to have an afternoon private appointment with the Apostle Paul. I mean, he wrote 13 books of the Bible. You know, I just admire the wisdom and the way he crafted those 13 books. And wouldn't it be great to have a private conversation with him? Then I thought about the 40 billion people who are probably ahead of me in line, and how many millions, if not billions of years I'd have to wait before an opening would come up on the Apostle Paul's calendar in the new creation. But as I read Revelation 21 and 22, I recognized that in the new creation, there is no families, there is no marriage, there is no sex. All that is replaced with something far better, which caused my publisher to suggest that I should have made that the subtitle on the book, Better Than Sex. We probably would have sold quite a few more copies than we're selling right now. But the whole point is, the family structure that we see and the marriage structure that we have here on planet Earth right now is designed to bring about some level of intimacy and love given the restrictions of physics and the space-time dimensions. And what I tell my wife is, in the new creation, we'll be constantly together. I'll be constantly beside her and be able to listen to everything she wants to communicate with me for all of eternity. And that'll be the case with everyone else. And you know, Ken Samples, our staff philosopher, says, I'm not sure I want to be listening to my wife for all of eternity. And I said, well, you can do that simultaneously with having a place, a cave, where you're all by yourself and nobody's talking to you. Both can happen simultaneously. Why? Because I believe that what you see described in the last two chapters of the Bible is that God is going to enable us to relate to one another geometrically rather than linearly, which means the Apostle Paul will be able to take millions of simultaneous private appointments and somehow be able to give private personal attention and care and love to millions of people simultaneously. It tells us that we'll be one in the same way that the Father and the Son are one. We'll be delivered from this restriction of space and time. So why doesn't God give us that now? Because we would abuse it for evil ends. And so he puts us in this space-time restriction in order to bring about a restraint on evil until evil is finally conquered and removed. So that means in the new creation, we'll be in continual contact with one another at the most intimate level, simultaneously with everyone else that is there, and you'll also be able to have your private moments. And in that context, the pleasure limits are completely lifted. And keep in mind that in the new creation, you'll never be around a boor. There's going to be no obnoxious people in the new creation, because getting in a new creation, everything that is obnoxious about it will be stripped away first, and so everybody's going to be fascinating to listen to in the new creation. And I shared that with Ken Samples that, hey, you're going to be wanting to listen to everything your wife wants to say to you for the rest of eternity, because she's going to be far more fascinating than she is now. That'll be true of every one of us. Well, I'd like to sum this up with a verse from Hebrews chapter 2. And the comment we see in the book of Hebrews is, how can we possibly turn down such a magnificent offer as we see life in the, let me bring this back for you. There we go. How can we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? If we really appreciate what God is offering to us in the new creation, and what he's offering in terms of his help to get through this test of evil and suffering, how can we possibly turn this down? Okay, if you want to read more about this, you can check out the book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. And if you'd like to be kept up to date in some of these latest scientific discoveries, I mean, literally they're coming out every day, you can not only get that free email, we make available a magazine called Connections, and it's available free for the asking. And with that, I'd like just to turn over our time to questions. We are going to do a drawing. So if you got that little card there that we passed out to you, to fill it out, we'll be picking up those cards, and we're going to be giving away some of these books. But I'd like to take a question or two before we collect all the cards. So who would like to offer a comment or a question? And it doesn't have to be in tonight's topic. I'll take anything that relates to science-based issues. Yes.
I was wondering, I'm not sure if it goes along exactly what you're saying, but in relation to Adam and Eve giving birth to all society, how
Okay, how come we didn't get a low-quality gene pool if indeed we're all descended from Adam and Eve? Well, what you notice in the Bible is there's no prohibition against brother-sister marriages in the book of Genesis. But there's a strong prohibition in the book of Exodus. And from Exodus forward, that's no longer permitted. Now, in the book of Genesis, what was forbidden was parents having intercourse with their children. That's a moral depravity, according to the book of Genesis, but not brother-sister marriages. And when you read the book of Exodus, what Moses says when he brings about that prohibition, he says, we're putting this into effect so that we will not suffer the diseases of the Egyptians. In other words, he's making the point that the prohibition against brother-sister marriages is not a moral prohibition, it's a health prohibition. And in terms of the diseases of the Egyptians, when the Jews left the land of Egypt for Israel, that was a period in time when the royal family of Egypt felt that they were gods and the rest of the people were beneath them. And so the only person a Jew or an Egyptian prince could marry was a sister. You know, she'd be a god, so only the gods married gods. Consequently, by the time Moses made that decree, we see in the Egyptian royal line hemophilia. And that's what he meant by the diseases of the Egyptians. And to answer your question, risks of genetic defects of that nature take many consecutive generations of brother-sister marriages. And if you're only talking a few generations, the risk is zero. And so we notice that in animal husbandry, that people want to develop a new breed, they will breed brother-sister creatures, but they recognize you can only do that for a few generations. Then you have to stop, or you're going to propagate genetic defects. And in some parts of North America, I think it'd be a good idea to prohibit first cousins from marrying, given how long cousins have been marrying one another. And so that's the principle there. It's okay for the first few generations, but there will come a time when you will propagate genetic defects. So in that sense, there's no problem, say, with Cain marrying a sister or a niece or a grandniece.
Okay, so then it's not as bad to recreate with your sister's children? I mean, I won't expect it to equal as much as directly to your sister.
Well, here in Canada, there's a law against that. And the reason why there's a law against it is because of the health issues.
Scientifically, doesn't crash.
Well, again, scientifically, we recognize that you run a serious risk if you marry your sister in terms of who you're going to propagate. And so that's why we don't do it. It's not because of morality, it's because of the health concern. Yes?
Adding on to that, like in a cellular level, how did the genes differ from Adam and Eve when they became able genes to like find and
Well, one of the reasons why we know that human beings were recently created is that we look at the genetic diversity of all the different ethnic groups, we see very little differentiation of DNA. So it tells us we must have had a relatively recent origin, because there hasn't been enough time for natural mutations to propagate much diversity. I don't know if that gets at your question or not. Okay. In the back there, then after we're going to do a drawing. Go ahead.
Okay. I was reading recently that astronomers and astrophysicists were having a little bit of difficulty with the age of the universe at 14.7 because they previously determined that the age of some of the older stars was getting up towards 20
Right.
billion years ago, like 18 or something like that, appreciably older than the age of the universe. Now, how has that been resolved, or is that still a conflict? Or?
Yeah, that was resolved more than 10 years ago. And so today the ages of the oldest stars are coming in at around a little more than 12 billion years, some 12.5 billion. In fact, we now recognize that we're not seeing the very oldest stars. And that's because the very oldest stars are supergiant stars that burn very quickly, burn out in less than 500,000 years, which means you're only going to be able to see them 13.7 billion light years away. And that's so far away, we do not yet have powerful enough telescopes to pick up the light from stars at those distances. But the next generation of optical telescopes probably will have the capacity to pick up the light of those firstborn stars. But we're anticipating that they'll come in at an age that we already know how old they're going to be because of our measurements in the cosmic background radiation. But yeah, you're right. 20 years ago, we were seeing a conflict between the expansion measurements of the universe, which gives you one indication of the age, and the indication we were getting from stellar burning. And you say, what corrected all that? Well, we found out that we were a little bit off on the expansion measures, and that we were quite a bit off on the estimates of how long these stars have been burning, and that was because of the problems with trying to determine exactly how star formation and star burning operates when the universe is very young. Now today, 20 years ago, the most accurate age we had for the universe was indeed based on stellar burning, and it wasn't 18 to 20 billion, but it was coming in at 16 billion, plus or minus about 4 billion years. And that one time, that was the most accurate estimate. Radiometric dating was less accurate than that. The expansion rate of the universe was less accurate. What has happened is all three methods have become far more accurate, and as they become far more accurate, they have become consistent. Such that today, if you look at the most accurate measurements we have today are based on the cosmic background radiation in the WMAP, and then the Sloan Digital Sky Survey of the dynamics of galaxies. And so those two independent methods both are telling us that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. The most accurate date we're getting is from the WMAP, which says 13.73 plus or minus 0.012. So in that sense, pardon me, 0.12. In that sense, we have an estimate that's a little bit better